The stagecoach rattled into Presidio, Texas on a scorching afternoon in July of 1876. And before the wheels had even stopped turning, the sound of desperate sobbing could be heard from within, so raw and broken that several people on the dusty street paused to look. Vernon Whitmore stood outside the general store, his worn hat shading eyes that had seen too many disappointments to get his hopes up about much any more. He had placed that advertisement 6 months ago in a moment of weakness, lonely nights on his ranch finally wearing down his resolve to remain alone forever. The responses had been few, and he had chosen Penelope Warren's letters because they seemed honest, not flowery or false. She had written about losing her family to illness in Missouri, about needing a fresh start, about wanting a simple life with an honest man. Her words had touched something in him he thought long dead. But now, as the stagecoach driver opened the door and a small figure in a gray traveling dress emerged, her face blotchy and tear-streaked, her eyes red and swollen, Vernon felt his stomach drop. This was not how he had imagined their first meeting. The woman stumbled slightly as she stepped down, clutching a worn carpetbag to her chest like a shield. She looked around the dusty street with an expression of such profound despair that Vernon almost turned away, almost walked back to his horse and rode the 15 miles back to his ranch without a word. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the set of her shoulders despite the tears, the way she stood up straight even though she was clearly falling apart. Maybe it was the flash of determination he saw beneath the sorrow in her hazel eyes. Or maybe it was just that he recognized that particular brand of grief, the kind that comes from losing everything and having nowhere left to go. He stepped forward, removing his hat. "Miss Warren," she turned toward him, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Up close, he could see she was younger than he had expected, probably around 23 or 24, with light brown hair that had mostly escaped its pins during the journey and a spray of freckles across her nose. She was pretty in an understated way, or would have been if her face was not so ravaged by crying. "Mr. Whitmore," her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Yes, madam." He did not know what else to say. The stagecoach driver was already hauling down a small trunk, the sum total of her worldly possessions, it seemed. She tried to speak, tried to say something, but instead a sob escaped her throat. She pressed her hand to her mouth, clearly mortified, trying desperately to compose herself. "I'm sorry," she managed. "I'm so sorry. I did not mean to arrive like this. The journey was just so long, and I kept thinking about everything I left behind, and Martha. She was the woman I was traveling with. She got off in El Paso, and I have been alone since then. And I just started thinking about my mother and my sisters." And another sob cut off her words. Vernon looked at this crying woman who had traveled over 1,000 miles to marry a stranger, and something shifted in his chest. He had been alone for 5 years now, ever since his wife Sarah had died of fever. 5 years of silence, of empty rooms, of talking only to his horses and his cattle. 5 years of convincing himself he preferred the solitude. But standing here, watching this brave, broken woman try to hold herself together in front of a town full of strangers, he felt something wake up inside him that he had thought was buried with Sarah. "No more tears," he said quietly, and when she looked up at him with those red-rimmed eyes, he continued, "Not here. Not standing in the street with everyone watching. Let me take you home first." It was not romantic or eloquent, but something in his tone, firm but not unkind, seemed to steady her. She nodded, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. Vernon picked up her trunk easily, muscles hardened by years of ranch work making light work of it, and gestured toward where his horse and wagon waited. The ride to the ranch was quiet at first. Penelope sat beside him on the wagon bench, her hands folded tightly in her lap, occasionally sniffling but making a visible effort to control her tears. The Texas landscape stretched out around them, vast and golden and harsh under the relentless sun. Vernon had always found a kind of peace in this emptiness, but he wondered what this woman from Missouri thought of it. Finally, she spoke. "I apologize for my state, Mr. Whitmore. You must think me terribly weak." "I think you must be pretty strong to have made the journey at all," he replied, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. "And you can call me Vernon. We are going to be married, after all. Seems foolish to stand on formality." "Vernon," she repeated softly, "and I'm Penelope. Though my mother used to call me Penny." "Penny," he said, and almost smiled. "That suits you better, I think." They fell silent again, but it felt less strained now. After a few more miles, Vernon said, "You want to tell me what had you so upset?" "The letters you wrote, they seemed like you were ready for this. But back there, you looked like you were going to your execution, not your wedding." Penelope took a shaky breath. "It's not you," she said quickly. "I mean, I have not even properly met you yet, so how could it be? It's just that when the stagecoach came over that last ridge, and I saw how empty everything was, how different from home, it all became very real. My mother has been gone 2 years now, and my younger sisters both died of scarlet fever the winter before that. I thought I had made my peace with it. I thought I was ready to start over. But then I realized that once I marry you, there is no going back. Missouri is not my home anymore. I have sold everything. This is my life now, and I do not even know if you are a good man or a cruel one, if you will be kind or harsh, if I have made the biggest mistake of my life, or the only choice I had left." Her honesty was like a punch to the gut. Vernon was quiet for a long moment, then said, "I cannot promise you this will be easy. The ranch is hard work, and the life is lonely. The nearest neighbors are 8 miles away. Winter can be brutal, and summer is not much better. But I can promise you this. I will never raise a hand to you in anger. I will never treat you as less than a partner. I lost my first wife 5 years ago, and I swore I would never marry again. But the loneliness got to be too much. I am not looking for a servant or a pretty face to warm my bed. I am looking for someone to share this life with, the good and the bad of it." Penelope turned to look at him fully for the first time, really studying his face. He was probably around 28 or 29, she guessed, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and blue eyes that held a kind of weary honesty. His face was tanned and weathered, with lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun. He was handsome in a rough, lived-in way, and there was something solid about him that made her want to trust him. "You loved her very much," Penelope said softly. "Your wife." "I did," Vernon admitted, "but she is gone and I am still here. Took me a long time to accept that I deserve to keep living, to maybe even find some happiness again. I do not expect you to replace her. I am not asking you to be Sarah. I am asking you to be yourself, and we will see if we can build something together." The honesty in his words made Penelope's eyes sting with fresh tears, but these were different somehow, less desperate. "Thank you for saying that," she whispered. "Thank you for being honest." The ranch came into view as they crested a low hill. It was not grand, just a sturdy wooden house with a porch, a barn, some outbuildings and corrals where horses moved lazily in the heat. But it looked well-maintained, cared for, and there was something welcoming about it despite its isolation. "Home," Vernon said simply. He helped her down from the wagon, his hands steady on her waist, and she was struck by how gentle he was despite his obvious strength. He carried her trunk inside while she followed, looking around at what would be her new life. The house was clean but sparse, clearly the domain of a man living alone. There was a main room with a fireplace, a kitchen area, a table with 2 chairs. Vernon gestured down a short hallway. Bedroom is down there. There is a spare room too, used to be for guests. You can have the bedroom if you want. I can sleep in the spare room until after we are married, give you some time to settle in. Penelope shook her head. That does not seem right. This is your home. I am the intruder here. You are not an intruder. You are going to be my wife. He set down her trunk. Look, we do not have to decide everything today. Why do not I show you around, get you settled, and we can figure out the rest as we go? Over the next few hours, Vernon showed her the ranch. He introduced her to his horses, 4 sturdy quarter horses and 1 aging mare named Bess, who had been Sarah's favorite. He showed her the chickens, the vegetable garden that was struggling in the heat, the well with its cool, clean water. He explained his routine, the cattle that grazed on his land, the work that needed doing every day. Penelope listened and watched, and slowly, very slowly, she felt the knot of panic in her chest begin to loosen. Vernon was patient, never rushing her, never making her feel foolish for her questions or her tears. When she started crying again while looking at the garden, thinking of her mother's garden back in Missouri, he simply handed her his handkerchief and waited quietly until she had composed herself. That evening, as the sun began to set and paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, they sat on the porch together. Vernon had made a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, apologizing for his limited cooking skills. Penelope had eaten mechanically, still too overwhelmed to have much appetite. "When were you thinking we should marry?" she asked quietly, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Vernon considered. "I figured we could ride into town in a few days, once you have had time to rest and settle in. The preacher comes through Presidio once a month, and I believe he is due in about a week, but there is no rush if you need more time." "A week," Penelope repeated. It seemed both impossibly soon and mercifully close. "That seems reasonable. It will give us time to get to know each other a little first." "That is what I was thinking." Vernon looked out at the darkening landscape. "I know this is not how you probably imagined your life would turn out, coming all this way to marry a stranger in the middle of nowhere." "No," Penelope agreed. "But then, life rarely turns out how we imagine, does it? A year ago, I was living with my aunt in St. Louis, working as a seamstress and trying to save enough money to maybe have a little shop of my own someday. I never thought I would be a mail-order bride in Texas. But my aunt passed away last winter and the shop where I worked closed, and suddenly I had no home, no job, no prospects. Your advertisement seemed like providence. Or desperation," Vernon said, not unkindly. "Maybe both," Penelope admitted with a small, sad smile. "But providence and desperation often go hand in hand, I think." They sat in silence for a while longer, listening to the cicadas and the distant lowing of cattle. Finally, Vernon stood and stretched. "I will take the spare room tonight. You take the bedroom. Tomorrow I will ride out to check on the cattle in the north pasture, but I should be back by early afternoon. Will you be all right here alone for a few hours?" Penelope nodded, though the thought of being alone in this strange place made her anxious. "I will be fine. Maybe I can do some cleaning, make myself useful." "You do not have to earn your keep," Vernon said firmly. "You just got here. Rest if you need to, explore if you want. This is your home now, too." That night, lying in the bedroom that had belonged to Vernon's first wife, Penelope stared at the ceiling and wondered what she had gotten herself into. The sheets smelled of lye soap and sunshine, clean and masculine. Through the thin walls, she could hear Vernon moving around in the spare room, the creak of the bed as he settled in for the night. She had been so sure when she responded to his advertisement. His letters had been kind, straightforward, honest about what he wanted and what he could offer. But now, Faced with the reality of it all, she felt terrified and small. What if she could not make this work? What if he grew to resent her? What if she could never love this hard, quiet man in this harsh, beautiful land? But there was no point in such thoughts now. She had made her choice, and she would see it through. With that resolution, she finally fell into an exhausted sleep. The next morning, Penelope woke to find Vernon already gone and a pot of coffee warming on the stove. She poured herself a cup and began to explore the house more thoroughly. In the bedroom, she found a dresser with empty drawers, clearly cleared out for her use. In the main room, there were a few books on a shelf, mostly practical volumes about ranching and animal husbandry, but also a worn copy of poetry that she suspected had belonged to Sarah. She found cleaning supplies and set to work, needing something to do with her hands. She scrubbed floors that were already clean, dusted shelves, washed windows. It was mindless work, but it helped calm her nerves. She was hanging curtains she had washed when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking out the window, she saw Vernon riding in on a big bay horse, his hat dusty and his shirt dark with sweat. He looked tired but pleased to see her, and something about that simple pleasure on his face made her heart skip. "You did not have to do all this," he said, looking around at the sparkling clean house. "I needed to do something," Penelope replied. "I cannot just sit idle." Vernon nodded, understanding. "I am going to wash up at the pump. Then maybe you would like to ride out with me this afternoon. I need to check the fences on the south pasture, and I thought you might like to see more of the ranch." "I would like that," Penelope said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. An hour later, she was on the aging mare Bess, following Vernon across his land. He was a good teacher, pointing out landmarks, explaining the boundaries of his property, the water sources the cattle used, the challenges of ranching in this harsh climate. Penelope found herself genuinely interested, asking questions, learning. "You are a quick study," Vernon observed as they paused to let the horses drink from a creek. "My father taught me that the best way to survive anywhere is to understand it," Penelope said. "He was a surveyor, always moving from place to place. He taught me to pay attention to learn the land." Smart man. He was. He died when I was 15, fell from a height while working. After that, everything fell apart for my mother. She never quite recovered from losing him. They rode on, and Vernon showed her a spot where the fence was damaged, explained how to repair it. He was patient with her questions, never making her feel ignorant or foolish. By the time they rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon, Penelope felt more settled than she had since leaving Missouri. Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Vernon would do his morning chores, and Penelope would prepare breakfast, trying to learn the wood stove and expand their diet beyond beans and cornbread. They would work together on various tasks around the ranch, and in the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk. Slowly, carefully, they began to know each other. Vernon told her about growing up in Tennessee, about coming west after the war to start fresh, about building this ranch from nothing. Penelope told him about her sisters, about her mother's decline after her father's death, about the scarlet fever that had taken her younger siblings and left her alone. "You ever wonder if you are being punished for something?" Penelope asked one evening. "If maybe you did something wrong and that is why you lose everyone you love." Vernon was quiet for a long moment. "I used to think that," he admitted. "After Sarah died, I was angry at God for a long time, angry at myself too for not being able to save her. But eventually I realized that sometimes terrible things just happen. It is not punishment or providence. It is just life, and life is hard." "That is a bleak philosophy," Penelope said softly. "Maybe, but it is also freeing in a way. If it is not my fault that bad things happen, then maybe I do not have to carry that guilt around forever." Maybe I can just try to do better, be better, and make something good out of what I have left. Penelope thought about that as she lay in bed that night. She had been carrying so much guilt, wondering if she could have done more to save her sisters, if she had been a better daughter, a better sister. But maybe Vernon was right. Maybe she could let that go and just try to move forward. The day before they were to ride into town for the wedding, Penelope was in the garden trying to revive the struggling plants when a rider approached. She shaded her eyes and saw a woman about her own age on a sturdy paint horse. "Hello there," the woman called cheerfully. "You must be Penelope." "I am Ruth Winters, from the ranch to the east. My husband Daniel and I heard that Vernon was getting married, and I just had to come by and meet you." Penelope wiped her hands on her apron and came forward, grateful for a female face. Ruth was tall and sun-bronzed, with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid and laugh lines around her eyes. She looked like someone who belonged in this landscape. "It is wonderful to meet you," Penelope said sincerely. "Please come in. I will make some coffee." Over coffee at the kitchen table, Ruth proved to be warm and talkative, a flood of information and gossip after the quiet intensity of Vernon's company. She told Penelope about the other ranching families in the area, about the challenges of living so far from town, about her own experiences coming to Texas as a young bride 8 years ago. "I was terrified at first," Ruth admitted. "I grew up in Philadelphia, and Texas might as well have been the moon for how different it was. But you adapt, you learn. And if you are lucky enough to have a good man, it makes all the difference." "Vernon seems like a good man," Penelope said carefully. "He is," Ruth assured her. "He had a rough time after Sarah died. He closed himself off, would barely speak to anyone. But Daniel said he has seemed more himself these past weeks, since he started writing to you. You are good for him already." They talked for over an hour before Ruth finally stood to leave. "You will have to come visit me soon," she insisted. "It is only about an hour's ride, and I get so hungry for female company. The men are fine, but they do not understand the need for a good conversation." After Ruth left, Penelope felt lighter somehow. Knowing there was another woman nearby, someone who understood what it was like to be new to this place, made everything seem less daunting. That evening, she told Vernon about Ruth's visit, and he smiled. "Ruth is good people," he said. "Her and Daniel both. It will be good for you to have a friend nearby." "Vernon," Penelope said hesitantly, "about tomorrow, are you sure about this? About marrying me? We have only known each other for less than a week." Vernon set down the harness he had been mending and looked at her seriously. "I am sure," he said. "Are you?" Penelope thought about it, really thought about it. This quiet man with his gentle hands and his honest eyes, this harsh land that was slowly revealing its beauty to her, this new life that was so different from anything she had imagined. "Yes," she said finally. "I am sure." The wedding took place in a small church in Presidio, with just a handful of witnesses. Penelope wore a simple blue dress, the best she owned, and Vernon wore a clean white shirt and his good jacket. The preacher was an old man named Reverend Thompson, who had been riding this circuit for 30 years, and he performed the ceremony with practiced efficiency but genuine warmth. When Vernon slipped a simple gold band on her finger, Penelope felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of grief or fear. They were something more complicated, a mix of hope and uncertainty and fragile joy. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Thompson said, and Vernon leaned in and pressed a gentle, chaste kiss to Penelope's lips. It was brief and respectful, but Penelope felt it all the way to her toes. After the ceremony, they had a simple meal at the boarding house with Ruth and Daniel Winters and a few other ranchers from the area. Everyone was friendly and welcoming, and Penelope began to feel like maybe she could make a place for herself here after all. The ride back to the ranch as the sun was setting felt different now. She was no longer Penelope Warren, mail-order bride from Missouri. She was Penelope Whitmore, rancher's wife, and this land was her home. When they arrived back at the ranch, Vernon helped her down from the wagon and then hesitated, clearly unsure of what to do next. They were married now, which meant expectations had changed, but neither of them seemed quite ready to address that directly. "I am going to put the horses away," Vernon said finally. "You go on inside." Penelope went into the house, her house now, and stood in the main room feeling oddly lost. She had been a maiden in the morning and was a wife now, and she was not entirely sure what that meant for tonight. Vernon had been nothing but respectful, sleeping in the spare room all week, but they were married now. Surely he would expect to share a bed. The thought made her nervous and warm all at once. She barely knew this man, but he was her husband now. She had expected this when she agreed to come here, but knowing it intellectually and facing it in reality were two different things. When Vernon came in from the barn, he found her standing by the fireplace, looking uncertain. He crossed the room to her, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. "Penny," he said softly, "I want you to know that I have certain expectations, but I am not going to rush you. We can take this as slow as you need." "We are married," Penelope said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have every right to expect. I have the right to expect respect and partnership," Vernon interrupted gently. "Everything else can wait until you are ready. I did not marry you just for that, Penny. I married you because I want someone to share my life with. The rest will come when it feels right for both of us." The relief that flooded through her was immense. "Thank you," she breathed. Vernon smiled, a real smile that lit up his whole face. "Now, how about I make us some coffee and we can sit on the porch like we have been doing? Just because we are married does not mean we have to change everything all at once." They sat on the porch as the stars came out, talking quietly about everything and nothing. And when Vernon finally suggested they go to bed, he went to the spare room without hesitation, leaving Penelope to the main bedroom. She lay awake for a long time, thinking about this strange, kind man she had married, and wondering when the fear would finally fade enough to let something else grow in its place. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, life at the ranch became routine. Penelope learned to cook on the wood stove, to gather eggs from the chickens without getting pecked, to help Vernon with the endless tasks of running a ranch. She was not afraid of hard work, and Vernon seemed to appreciate her willingness to learn. They grew comfortable with each other in small ways. Vernon taught her to ride better, taking her on longer rides across the ranch. Penelope mended his clothes and experimented with new recipes, trying to add some variety to their meals. They talked in the evenings, sharing stories and dreams and fears, but there was still a distance between them, a careful politeness that kept them from getting too close. Vernon still slept in the spare room. They did not touch beyond the occasional brush of hands or his assistance mounting a horse. It was a friendly partnership, but not yet a marriage in the fullest sense. One evening about a month after the wedding, they were sitting on the porch when Penelope said suddenly, "Do you regret this?" "Marrying me?" Vernon looked startled. "No, why would you ask that?" "Because we are like business partners or friends, not like husband and wife. And I wonder if you feel cheated, if you wish you had married someone who could give you more." Vernon was quiet for a long moment. "Can I be honest with you, please?" "I am afraid," he admitted. "When Sarah died, it nearly destroyed me. For a long time, I did not want to feel anything at all because feeling meant hurting. And I look at you and I am starting to feel things again, and it terrifies me. Because what if I let myself care for you and then I lose you too?" Penelope felt tears sting her eyes. "I am afraid too," she whispered. "Everyone I have ever loved has left me. My father, my mother, my sisters. And now I am starting to care for you, and I am terrified that if I let myself love you, something will happen to take you away too." Vernon reached over and took her hand, the first time he had initiated such contact. His hand was calloused and warm, completely engulfing hers. "So what do we do?" he asked. "I think we have to be brave," Penelope said. "I think we have to choose to try even though it is scary, because what is the alternative? Living like ghosts, never letting ourselves feel anything, that is not really living at all." Vernon squeezed her hand. "You are right," he said. "You are absolutely right." He stood up, still holding her hand, and gently pulled her to her feet. "Come here," he said softly, and drew her into his arms. It was the first real embrace they had shared, and Penelope melted into it, pressing her face against his chest and listening to the steady thud of his heart. Vernon rested his chin on top of her head and just held her, neither of them speaking, both of them finally letting down their walls just a little. When they finally pulled apart, Vernon cupped her face in his hands and looked at her seriously. "I want to really try at this," he said. "I want this to be a real marriage, but I need to know that you want that too." "I do," Penelope said, and realized she meant it completely. "I want that very much." Vernon smiled and leaned down to kiss her, and this time it was not the chaste peck from their wedding. It was real and warm and full of promise, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I think," Vernon said, his voice rough, "that maybe I should stop sleeping in the spare room." "I think," Penelope agreed, her heart racing, "that sounds like a very good idea." That night, they shared a bed for the first time as husband and wife, and while Penelope was nervous, Vernon was patient and gentle, taking his time to make sure she was comfortable every step of the way. And when it was over and she lay curled against his side, listening to his heartbeat slow, she felt something shift inside her. This was real now. This was her life, her marriage, her home. After that night, things changed between them. The careful politeness gave way to genuine affection. Vernon would drop a kiss on Penelope's head when he came in from working. Penelope would lean against him when they sat together in the evenings. They laughed more, touched more, talked more openly about their hopes and fears. Penelope visited Ruth regularly, and the two women became close friends. Ruth taught her about the local plants, which ones were edible and which ones medicinal. She shared recipes and advice, and the kind of honest conversation that Penelope had been missing since her sisters died. "You look happy," Ruth observed one day when Penelope had ridden over for a visit. "Different from when you first arrived." "I am happy," Penelope realized with some surprise. "I did not think I could be after everything that happened, but I am." "Vernon is good for you," Ruth said, "and you are good for him. Daniel says he has not seen Vernon smile this much in years." The summer faded into fall, and the brutal heat gave way to slightly cooler temperatures. Vernon taught Penelope to shoot, saying she needed to be able to defend herself when he was out on the range. She turned out to have a good eye, and Vernon praised her progress with obvious pride. They worked together to prepare for winter, stocking up on supplies, making sure the barn was tight and secure, putting by food for the lean months. It was hard work, but Penelope found satisfaction in it, in building something together. One evening in late October, as they were finishing dinner, Penelope said, "I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" Vernon asked. "When I first arrived, you told me no more tears, and I have not cried, not really, since that first day, but I think maybe that was not quite right." Vernon looked concerned. "What do you mean?" I think I have been afraid to let myself grieve properly because I was trying so hard to be strong and brave and not burden you with my sadness." But I am sad sometimes, Vernon. I miss my family. I miss my old life, even though I love my new one. And I think I need to be able to feel that without being afraid you will think less of me for it. Vernon reached across the table and took her hand. I would never think less of you for feeling your feelings, he said. When I said no more tears, I did not mean you should never cry. I just meant that you did not have to face everything alone anymore. You can cry, Penny. You can be sad and angry and scared, but you do not have to be those things by yourself. I am here, and I am not going anywhere. Penelope felt tears spring to her eyes, and this time she did not try to hold them back. She cried for her lost family, for the life she had left behind, for the fear and uncertainty of those first days in Texas. And Vernon held her through it, stroking her hair and murmuring comforting words, never once making her feel like she was too much or asking too much. When the tears finally subsided, Penelope felt lighter, cleaner, like something that had been festering inside her had finally been lanced. "Thank you," she whispered against Vernon's shoulder. "Always," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That is what marriage is supposed to be, Penny, being there for each other through the hard times as well as the good." Winter came to West Texas with surprising force, bringing cold winds and occasional sleet. Vernon and Penelope spent long evenings by the fire, Vernon reading aloud from books while Penelope sewed or knitted. They played cards and talked and learned each other's habits and quirks. Penelope discovered that Vernon had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was relaxed and comfortable. Vernon discovered that Penelope could not carry a tune to save her life, but loved to sing anyway, especially when she was cooking. They learned to work together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs and movements. In late December, a bad storm blew in, dumping several inches of snow and ice. They were snowed in for 3 days, unable to even make it to the barn. They had to dig a path through the drifts to check on the animals, working together in the bitter cold. The third night of the storm, huddled together under every blanket they owned, Vernon said, "This is the first winter I have not dreaded in 5 years." "Why is that?" Penelope asked, though she thought she knew. "Because I am not alone," Vernon said simply. "Because you are here, and this feels like a home again instead of just a house I live in." Penelope snuggled closer to him. "I never thought I would say this, but I am glad I answered your advertisement. I am glad I came here, even though it was the scariest thing I have ever done." "I am glad too," Vernon said, and kissed her soundly. By the time spring arrived, Penelope could hardly remember the terrified woman who had arrived in Presidio in tears 9 months earlier. She was confident now, capable, sure of her place in this world. She could rope a calf, shoot a snake, mend a fence, and cook a decent meal. She knew every inch of the ranch and loved it fiercely. But more than that, she loved Vernon. She loved his quiet strength, his gentle humor, his steadfast reliability. She loved the way he looked at her like she was precious, the way he listened when she talked, the way he held her at night like she was something worth protecting. One morning in April, Penelope woke feeling queasy. She barely made it outside before she was sick, losing what little she had in her stomach. Vernon found her a few minutes later, pale and shaking. "Are you all right?" he asked, concerned. "I do not know," Penelope admitted. "I have been feeling odd for a few days now. Maybe I ate something bad." But when the sickness continued for a week, always in the mornings, Penelope began to suspect something else. She rode over to see Ruth, who took one look at her and smiled knowingly. "You are pregnant, are not you?" Ruth said. Penelope's hand flew to her stomach. "I think I might be," she admitted. "How did you know?" "You have that look," Ruth said. "I have seen it enough times. I have 3 children of my own, remember. When did you last have your monthly courses?" Penelope thought back and realized with a start that it had been over 2 months. How did I not realize? She wondered aloud. You have been busy settling into a new life, Ruth said kindly. It is easy to lose track of such things, but yes, I would say you are definitely expecting. How do you feel about it? Penelope sat down heavily, her hand still pressed to her stomach. Terrified, she admitted, but also happy. Is that strange? Not at all, Ruth assured her. That is how I felt with each of mine. It is a big change bringing a new life into the world, but you have Vernon and you have friends and you will be just fine. That evening, Penelope waited until after dinner to tell Vernon. She was nervous, unsure how he would react. They had never really discussed children, though she supposed it was assumed that a marriage would produce them. Vernon, she said as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. I have something to tell you. He looked at her, picking up on the seriousness in her tone. What is it? I am pregnant, she said simply. I am going to have a baby. Vernon stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face, growing until he was grinning like a fool. Really? He asked. You are sure? As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor, but all the signs are there. Vernon let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. We are going to have a baby, he said, wonder in his voice. Penny, that is the best news I have heard in years. You are happy about it? Penelope asked, even though it was obvious. Happy does not even begin to cover it, Vernon said, setting her down gently and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. A baby, our baby, I never thought I would have this again. Again? Penelope asked softly. Vernon's expression grew sad. Sarah was pregnant when she died, he admitted. We were going to have a son. That is what the doctor said afterward. I lost them both, and I thought I would never have another chance. But now here you are, giving me everything I thought I had lost forever. Penelope felt tears prick her eyes at the emotion in his voice. I am going to do my best to give you a healthy child, she promised. I know you will, Vernon said, pulling her close. And I am going to do everything in my power to keep you both safe. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and into the summer. Vernon became almost comically protective, not wanting Penelope to do anything remotely strenuous. She had to put her foot down when he suggested she stop riding entirely. I am pregnant, not made of glass, she told him firmly. Ruth rode until she was 7 months along with all 3 of her children. I will be fine. But she did appreciate his concern, even when it was excessive. It felt good to be cared for so thoroughly, to know that she and the baby were so precious to him. As summer gave way to fall, Penelope grew rounder and slower. Ruth came by regularly to check on her, bringing hand-me-down baby clothes and advice. Other ranching wives from the area visited too, bringing gifts and well wishes. Penelope was touched by the kindness of these women, this community she had become a part of. In early November, when Penelope was about 8 months along, Vernon hired a woman named Clara to come stay at the ranch. Clara was an older woman who had been a midwife for 30 years, and she had agreed to stay with them until after the baby was born. I am not taking any chances, Vernon said when Penelope protested that it was an unnecessary expense. I want you and the baby to have the best care possible. Clara was a no-nonsense woman with kind eyes and capable hands. She checked Penelope over thoroughly and pronounced everything to be progressing well. Strong heartbeat, she said. Good position. I would say you have another month or so to go, but the baby had other ideas. 3 weeks later, on a cold December morning, Penelope woke with pains in her back. At first, she thought she had just slept wrong, but as the day progressed, the pains grew stronger and more regular. I think the baby is coming, she told Clara at midday, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. Clara felt her stomach and nodded. Today or tomorrow, she agreed. Let me get things ready. And somebody better tell that husband of yours before he wears a hole in the floor with his pacing." Vernon had been hovering anxiously all morning, and when Clara told him the baby was coming, he went pale. "Is she all right? Is there anything I can do?" "She is fine," Clara said firmly. "This is normal, but you need to stay out of the way and let me work. You can boil water and tear up those old sheets I showed you, and otherwise, just try to stay calm." The labor lasted through the afternoon and into the night. Penelope had never experienced pain like this, waves of it that seemed to go on forever. But Clara was there, coaching her through it, and she could hear Vernon outside the door, his presence a comfort even though he could not be with her. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, with one last tremendous push, Penelope felt the baby slip free. There was a moment of terrifying silence, and then the most beautiful sound in the world, a baby's cry, strong and indignant. "It is a boy," Clara announced, wrapping the baby in a clean blanket. "A healthy baby boy." She placed the baby on Penelope's chest, and Penelope looked down at the tiny red face, the dark hair, the little fingers curled into fists. "Hello," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, little one." The door burst open and Vernon rushed in, his face wild with worry until he saw Penelope sitting up, tired but smiling, holding their son. "Is he all right? Are you all right?" "We are both fine," Penelope assured him. "Come meet your son." Vernon approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the baby with an expression of such profound love and wonder that it made Penelope's heart ache. "He is perfect," Vernon breathed. "Penny, he is absolutely perfect. Do you want to hold him?" Penelope asked, and carefully transferred the baby to Vernon's arms. Vernon held his son with the confidence of someone who had done this before, supporting the tiny head carefully. The baby quieted at his father's touch, blinking up at him with dark eyes. "Hello, son," Vernon said softly. "I am your father, and I am going to love you and protect you for as long as I live." Penelope watched her husband hold their child and felt so full of love she thought she might burst. This was her family now. This was her home. All the fear and pain and loss that had brought her here seemed worth it for this moment. "What should we name him?" Vernon asked, unable to take his eyes off the baby. Penelope had been thinking about this. "What was your father's name?" "William," Vernon said. "And mine was Peter," Penelope said. "What about William Peter? We could call him Will." "William Peter Whitmore," Vernon tested the name. "I like it. What do you think, Will? Do you like your name?" The baby yawned, completely unconcerned with such matters, and both parents laughed. Over the next weeks, they adjusted to life with a baby. Will was a good baby, healthy and strong, though he kept them up at all hours with his demands to be fed and changed and held. Vernon was a devoted father, getting up in the night to bring Will to Penelope for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor for hours when the baby was fussy. "You are so good with him," Penelope observed one night, watching Vernon soothe Will with practiced ease. "I used to imagine this," Vernon admitted. "When Sarah was pregnant, I would think about what it would be like to hold my child, to teach him things, to watch him grow. I never thought I would actually get the chance, so I am not going to waste a single moment of it." Christmas that year was the happiest either of them could remember. They invited Ruth and Daniel and their children over, along with a few other neighboring families. The house was full of laughter and noise and life, so different from the lonely silence that had filled it just over a year ago. As Penelope looked around at the gathering, at Vernon holding Will and talking with Daniel, at Ruth helping her in the kitchen, at the children playing on the floor, she felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what she had been looking for when she answered that advertisement, even if she had not fully known it at the time. Not just a husband or a home, but a whole life, full of love and friendship and purpose. Winter passed into spring, and Will grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, smiling baby who laughed at everything and everyone. Vernon would take him out to the barn in the mornings, talking to him about the horses and the cattle as if the baby could understand. Penelope would find them like that, Vernon holding Will carefully while he worked, explaining everything he was doing. "You know he does not understand a word you are saying," Penelope teased one morning. "Not yet," Vernon agreed, "but he will. And when he does, he will already know all about ranching." One evening in late spring, when Will was about 6 months old and sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Vernon and Penelope sat on the porch as they had so many times before. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and the land stretched out around them in peaceful silence. "You remember the day you arrived?" Vernon asked. "How could I forget?" Penelope replied. "I was such a mess, crying and terrified." "You were brave," Vernon corrected. "Coming all this way, starting over with nothing but hope and determination. I knew right then that you were strong, even if you did not know it yourself." "I did not feel strong," Penelope admitted. "I felt like I was falling apart." "But you did not," Vernon pointed out. "You put yourself back together, piece by piece. You built a life here. You made this ranch a home again. You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever." "What is that?" Penelope asked softly. "Joy," Vernon said simply. "The ability to be happy, to look forward to tomorrow instead of just enduring it. You did that, Penny. You and Will, you gave me my life back." Penelope felt tears sting her eyes, but they were good tears. "You gave me a life too," she said. "A real life, not just existing but actually living." "I love you, Vernon. I should have said it before now, but I do. I love you so much." "I love you too," Vernon said, pulling her close. "More than I ever thought I could love anyone again. You are my whole world, Penny, you and Will both." They sat together as the stars came out, wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the peaceful sounds of the night. Inside, their son slept safely. Around them, their ranch thrived. And in their hearts, love had taken root and grown into something strong and true. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and harvests, of cattle drives and long winters, of small joys and occasional hardships. Will grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious child, his dark hair and blue eyes marking him clearly as his father's son. He learned to walk on the ranch, his first steps taking him toward the barn where Vernon was working. His first word was "Da," much to Vernon's delight and Penelope's mock indignation. When Will was 2, Penelope discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was no fear, just excitement and anticipation. Vernon was delighted, hoping for a daughter this time, though he insisted he would be just as happy with another son. Their daughter arrived in the spring, born during a thunderstorm that seemed to match her temperament. She came into the world screaming and did not stop for what felt like hours. They named her Sarah Rose, after Vernon's first wife and Penelope's mother, and she had Penelope's light brown hair and a temper to match the red highlights that showed in the sunshine. Will was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. He would bring her toys, sing to her in his tuneless toddler voice, and proudly tell anyone who would listen that he was a big brother now. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Vernon expanded his herd, bought more land, built a bigger barn. Penelope started a proper garden, raising vegetables not just for their table but to sell in town. She also began taking in sewing work, her neat stitches and good eye for alterations earning her a reputation in Presidio. Ruth remained Penelope's closest friend, their children growing up together, learning to ride and rope and work the land. The community of ranchers supported each other through droughts and hard winters, celebrating together when times were good. When Sarah Rose was 3 and Will was 5, Penelope found herself pregnant again. This baby was another boy, quieter and more thoughtful than his siblings. They named him James after Vernon's grandfather, and he seemed content to observe the world around him with serious dark eyes. Vernon proved to be a wonderful father, patient and loving with all 3 children. He taught them about the land, about animals, about hard work and honesty and treating others with respect. He told them stories about their grandparents, about Penelope's brave journey from Missouri, about how their family came to be. One evening, when the children were all in bed and Vernon and Penelope sat on the porch as was their habit, Penelope said, "Did you ever imagine your life would turn out like this?" "Never," Vernon admitted. "When I placed that advertisement, I was just hoping for someone to help ease the loneliness. I never imagined I would find this much happiness again." "I used to think I was cursed," Penelope said softly, "that everyone I loved would be taken from me. But now I have all of you, and I am not afraid anymore. I know that nothing is guaranteed, that life can change in an instant. But I am not going to waste time being afraid of what might happen. I am just going to enjoy what we have." "That sounds like a good philosophy," Vernon said, pulling her close. As the children grew, the ranch became more lively. Will, at 8, was already helping his father with real ranch work, eager to prove himself capable. Sarah Rose, at 6, was learning to ride and proving to be fearless, much to her mother's concern. Little James, at 3, followed his siblings everywhere, quiet but determined. Penelope had fully claimed her place not just in the family but in the community. She organized church socials, helped new families settling in the area, served as a midwife's assistant when Clara needed help. She was no longer the scared girl who had arrived in tears over a decade ago. She was a confident woman, a mother, a rancher's wife, a valued member of her community. One autumn afternoon, when Penelope was at the general store in town, she encountered a young woman stepping off the stage coach. The woman looked around with wide, frightened eyes, clutching a carpetbag to her chest. She looked lost and scared and on the verge of tears. Penelope recognized that look immediately. It was how she must have looked all those years ago. She approached the young woman gently. "Are you all right, dear? Can I help you with something?" The woman looked at her gratefully. "I am supposed to meet someone," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "A Mr. Thomas Wilson. I am his mail-order bride, but I do not see anyone who looks like they might be waiting for someone." "Tom Wilson," Penelope said. "I know him. His ranch is about 10 miles north of here. He is a good man, reliable and honest. I am sure he will be along soon. Why do not you come wait inside the store where it is cooler?" The young woman followed her inside, and Penelope bought her a cool drink and sat with her, making gentle conversation to help settle her nerves. She told her about her own arrival in Presidio, about how scared she had been, about how everything had worked out better than she could have imagined. "Really?" the woman asked hopefully. "You are happy here?" "Happier than I ever thought possible," Penelope said honestly. "It is not an easy life, but it is a good one. And if Tom Wilson is half the man my Vernon is, you will be just fine." When Tom finally arrived, apologizing for being late due to a problem with his wagon wheel, Penelope made sure to introduce herself and let him know that the young woman would have friends in the area. She gave the bride her address and invited her to visit once she was settled. Riding back to the ranch, Penelope thought about how much had changed since she was that frightened woman arriving in tears. She had built a life here, had found love and happiness and purpose. She had 3 beautiful children and a husband who loved her completely. She had friends and a community and a home. When she arrived back at the ranch, Vernon was in the corral working with a new horse while the children watched from the fence, all of them calling out advice and encouragement. The house stood solid and welcoming, smoke rising from the chimney where she had left a stew simmering. The barn was full of healthy animals, the fields green and productive. This was her life, her home, her family. And she would not change a single moment of the journey that had brought her here, not even the fear and tears of that first day. Vernon looked up and saw her, his face breaking into a smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. "Welcome home," he called, and those two simple words held everything: love and belonging and the promise of all the years still to come. The children ran to greet her, all talking at once about what they had been doing, what they had seen, what they wanted for dinner. Penelope dismounted and was immediately surrounded by her family, Vernon's arm coming around her waist, while telling her about the new foal. Sarah rose demanding she come see her new drawing, James holding up an interesting rock he had found. That night, after the children were in bed and Vernon and Penelope lay together in the darkness, she said, "I saw a mail-order bride arriving in town today. She looked just like I must have looked when I arrived." "Scared," Vernon guessed. "Terrified," Penelope confirmed. "But hopeful too, underneath the fear. I told her it would be all right, that this could be a good life if she was brave enough to embrace it." "That was good of you," Vernon said. "I wish someone had been there to tell you that when you arrived." "But you were there," Penelope reminded him. "You told me no more tears, not here. And you kept that promise, Vernon. You gave me a life where I do not have to cry anymore, where I can be happy and safe and loved." "You gave me that too," Vernon said softly. "We gave it to each other." They lay in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the night, the distant call of an owl, the gentle breathing of their children in the next rooms. This was peace, Penelope thought. This was home. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. There were hard winters and dry summers. Years when the cattle prices were low and money was tight. Years when illness swept through the area, and they had to nurse each other and their neighbors through fevers and coughs. But there were good years too, years of abundance and celebration, years when the children hit milestones and the ranch prospered. Will grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet competence and steady reliability. He took over more and more of the ranch work, allowing Vernon to slow down slightly as the years caught up with him. Sarah Rose remained spirited and fearless, learning to break horses and refusing to be limited by what people thought a girl should do. James grew into a thoughtful young man with a talent for fixing things, always tinkering with equipment and finding ways to make the ranch work more efficiently. When Will was 21, he married a girl from a neighboring ranch, a sweet young woman named Anna who fit into the family perfectly. They built a house on the far edge of Vernon and Penelope's property, and within a year, Penelope found herself a grandmother for the first time. Holding her grandson for the first time, looking at Will's proud face and Anna's tired but happy smile, Penelope felt the circle of life complete itself. She remembered being the young mother, exhausted and overwhelmed but filled with love. Now she was the grandmother, able to offer wisdom and support, and then hand the baby back when he cried. Vernon stood beside her, looking at their son and grandson with obvious pride. "We did well," he said softly. "Look at the family we made." "We did very well," Penelope agreed. Sarah Rose, at 19, announced she had no intention of marrying anytime soon, declaring she wanted to see more of the world first. She took a job in town at the general store, saving her money and planning a trip to San Antonio. Vernon and Penelope supported her independence, even as they worried about her safety. James, at 16, was already being courted by neighboring ranchers who recognized his talent with machinery and wanted his help with various projects. He was quieter than his siblings but no less determined, with plans to eventually start a business building and repairing agricultural equipment. Time moved differently as Vernon and Penelope grew older. Days seemed shorter, years seemed to pass in the blink of an eye. Their hair grayed, their movements slowed, but their love for each other only deepened. They knew each other so well now that they could communicate with just a look, finishing each other's sentences and anticipating each other's needs. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children organized a celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, bringing food and gifts and well wishes. Ruth and Daniel were there, their own children grown now with families of their own. Other couples who had married around the same time, who had built their lives in this harsh, beautiful land together. As the party wound down and the sun began to set, Vernon took Penelope's hand and led her to their favorite spot on the porch. Someone had decorated it with wildflowers, and 2 chairs sat waiting for them. 25 years, Vernon said, shaking his head in wonder. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. I know exactly what you mean, Penelope said. I can still remember stepping off that stagecoach, so scared I could barely breathe. And then I saw you standing there and you looked so solid and real, and I thought maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. Was I right? Vernon asked, even though he knew the answer. When I told you no more tears, not here, was I right? You were right, Penelope confirmed. Oh, there have been tears, of course. Happy tears and sad tears and everything in between. But I have never felt alone in them, not once in 25 years. You have been there through everything, Vernon. You have given me the most wonderful life. We gave it to each other, Vernon said, just as he had so many years ago. He pulled a small box from his pocket. I got you something. Inside was a delicate gold locket. Vernon opened it to show her what was inside. A tiny photograph of them on their wedding day on one side, and a newer photograph of their whole family on the other. So you can carry us all with you always, Vernon said softly. Penelope felt tears spring to her eyes, the good kind that came from being overwhelmed with love. It is perfect, she whispered. Help me put it on. Vernon fastened the locket around her neck, his fingers gentle despite the arthritis that had begun to stiffen them. When it was secured, Penelope touched it gently, feeling the weight of it against her chest. I love you, she said, turning to face him. More now than even on the day we married. I did not know it was possible to love someone this much. I love you too, Vernon said, cupping her face in his hands the way he had done so many times over the years. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Penny. The very best. They kissed as the sun set, surrounded by the life they had built together, the family they had created, the love that had sustained them through everything. And if there were tears on both their faces, well, they were the good kind. The kind that came from being so full of joy and gratitude and love that it had to overflow somehow. As the years continued to pass, Vernon and Penelope gradually stepped back from the daily running of the ranch, leaving more and more in Will's capable hands. They had earned their rest, and they took it gladly, spending their days in simpler pleasures. Penelope worked in her garden, where flowers now grew alongside vegetables, bright splashes of color in the Texas landscape. Vernon sat on the porch and whittled, creating little toys for the growing number of grandchildren. Sarah Rose eventually did take her trip to San Antonio, and when she came back 6 months later, she brought a husband with her, a banker's son who had fallen head over heels for the spirited ranch girl. They settled in Presidio, where Sarah Rose opened a dress shop and her husband opened a branch of his father's bank. She never did become a traditional ranch wife, but she was happy, and that was all that mattered. James married a quiet girl named Emma, who shared his love of tinkering and problem-solving. Together, they started a business manufacturing and repairing farm equipment, and it prospered beyond anyone's expectations. They built a house in town but visited the ranch every Sunday for dinner, a tradition that continued for years. More grandchildren came, and then great-grandchildren, and the house that had once been so quiet and lonely was constantly filled with noise and laughter. Vernon and Penelope presided over their growing family with quiet pride, offering wisdom when asked, support when needed, and unconditional love always. On a warm evening in late spring, when Vernon was 72 and Penelope was 69, they sat together on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. Vernon had been moving slower lately, his heart not as strong as it once was. But he insisted he felt fine, that he just needed to pace himself better. "You remember what you said to me the day we met?" Penelope asked, holding his hand gently. "I said a lot of things that day," Vernon replied with a smile. "You said no more tears, not here," Penelope reminded him. "And I have been thinking about that lately, about how you gave me that gift, a life where I did not have to be sad or scared anymore, and I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for every single day of the past 47 years. Thank you for being exactly who you are." Vernon squeezed her hand. "I should be thanking you. You took a lonely, broken man and taught him how to live again. You gave me children and grandchildren and a reason to wake up every morning with a smile. You turned a house into a home and a life into a blessing." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors. This land that had once seemed so harsh and foreign to Penelope now felt like the only place she could ever truly belong. These rolling hills, this endless sky, this ranch that they had built together, it was all home. Vernon passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, with Penelope holding his hand and their children gathered around. He had lived a long, full life, and he left behind a legacy of love and hard work and family. Penelope grieved him deeply, but she did not fall apart the way she had when she lost her first family. She had learned that love does not end with death, that the people we love stay with us always in the memories we make and the lessons they teach us. She lived for another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She tended her garden and told stories about the old days and passed on the wisdom she had earned through a lifetime of joy and sorrow. She wore Vernon's wedding ring on a chain around her neck, next to the locket he had given her, carrying him with her always. When Penelope passed away peacefully at the age of 79, surrounded by family in the house where she had lived for over 5 decades, her last thoughts were of that scared young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in tears all those years ago. How could she have known then what an amazing life awaited her? How could she have imagined the love and happiness and purpose she would find in this harsh, beautiful land? She was buried next to Vernon on a hillside overlooking the ranch, and at her funeral, her children and grandchildren told stories about her courage, her strength, her unwavering love for her family. They talked about how she had traveled over 1,000 miles to marry a stranger and had found not just a husband but a whole life. They talked about her kindness, her wisdom, her ability to make any place feel like home. And in the years that followed, as the ranch was passed down through the generations, as new children were born and grew and had children of their own, the story of Vernon and Penelope was told and retold. The lonely rancher who had placed an advertisement in a moment of desperation. The grieving woman who had answered it, looking for a fresh start. The love that had grown between them, steady and strong and true. Their legacy lived on not just in the land they had worked and the house they had built, but in the family they had created, in the love that had been passed down through generations. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting and the Texas sky was painted in brilliant colors, family members sitting on that same porch where Vernon and Penelope had sat so many times would swear they could feel their presence, watching over the ranch and the family with the same love and pride they had shown in life. The story that had begun with tears had ended with joy, with love, with a legacy that would endure for generations. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift of all. Two people who had found each other in their darkest moments and had built a life together that was filled with light. A mail-order bride who had arrived in tears and a lonely rancher who had promised her no more tears, not here. And he had kept that promise, giving her a life of love and happiness that exceeded anything she could have imagined. Their love story became a part of the land itself, woven into the fabric of the ranch and the family and the community they had helped build. And in every generation, young people falling in love would hear the story and take hope from it, proof that even when life seems darkest, even when all seems lost, love can find a way. Love can heal the broken places. Love can turn tears into joy and strangers into family. That was the true legacy of Vernon and Penelope Whitmore. Not just the land or the house or even the family, but the enduring proof that love, real and true and steadfast, can transform everything. And that legacy would live on, passed down through the generations, a story of hope and courage and the transformative power of love, forever and always.